Hello, you guys. Happy Tuesday. Thank you very, very, very much for joining us. We've got Terma, Toast, Jack, Satara, Chocobo. Hey, guys. Hey, Inky. Thank you so much for making your Twitch account.
Inky, hello, hello, hello.
I am going to quickly bestow love upon Inky. Hang on.
Oh ho ho.
So tonight we are talking about Ryan, my favorite topic when it comes to writing, which is character writing and characterization.
Words cannot express how much love we have for this topic. We're very much of the opinion that characters are what drive the story forward, so we're very excited to talk about this tonight.
Welcome back. So as always, this is a very laid back panel. I'm sure you guys will have a lot of questions, which is totally fine. So speak up with your questions when you can. We will answer them when we can and when we see them. If you need us to go back or slow down, don't be afraid to say so and ask us to go back or go to the last slide.
Yep, this is an interactive panel, so if you have any questions, concerns, comments, whatever, just let us know, and we will adapt on the fly.
So if you're new to us or the stream or to the panel, I am Kat or Lynx in the Discord, and I've been doing freelance work for the last 6 years where I do editing, commission work, ghostwriting, and then of course I am one half of Double Blind with my husband, Ray, and we write everyone's cat girl.
Yep, and as some of you know, I am the other half. I go by Rye on the Discord. I am the other half of Double Blind. I've been doing a lot of the same work that she's been doing for just a little bit less. But let's go ahead and get right into it.
The best vehicle for characters to drive the plot forward could also be a carriage, depending on if it's a fantasy.
It's a flying car in our case.
So a little bit of what we're going to cover today. I asked you guys last night, Creamy, what you would like us to talk about, and we got diversifying characters and research, different points of view, distinguishing dialogue, character thoughts, character knowledge, and inner thoughts. So this is kind of the general overview of what we're going to touch on. But again, if you have any extra questions or if you want us to talk about something else at the end, we will be here. Which cat girl, Creamy? There were a few. So the first place we're gonna start is diversifying characters. The blonde was Saris, yeah, which is actually the daughter of the man in this picture, which is Yanush. For character diversity, first and foremost, it is important, very, very, very important to find their truths. What we mean by this is find the thing that they are living for. What is their big, not even just a goal, like their overall, their truth in life. So this can change sometimes as as the story progresses. You'll find that maybe it's been met or that it's been broken or it needs to adjust. But a truth can be something as simple as I will fight for my friends. If you have characters with different truths, or with the same truths rather, you'll want to find the nuances inside of that. So maybe you have 3 characters that are very loyal to their friends. Okay, so why is character A loyal versus character B? Is it because they experienced something where they were let down? Is character B only loyal to one particular friend? Like, dive into it a little bit more.
Let's see. Chobo asks, how do you balance a character's backstory with their development in the narrative? Like the change over the course of the story, so backstory updates. We'll actually get into that a little later. Yeah, we do actually touch on that a bit. I'll go ahead and move on to the next step, though, is whenever you're creating your characters, we're assuming that you've already got the basic structure for some of the characters down. but develop a few pieces of their background. And now it's really important that you don't overdo this. It can be as simple as, just 3 little traits, like they lost both their parents when they were young, they live on a really comfortable island, and they've known their best friend since childhood. Something really simple like that. If you start with basic pieces, it'll kind of help you develop them as time goes on. As many of you are aware of at this point, me and Kat are discovery writers, so we like to let the characters talk to us. So if you start with a more basic foundation, you can build upon it as time goes on.
And then use your world's geography, races, and cultures to solidify them in it. So this kind of goes with your question, Chocobo. How do you balance a character's backstory with their development in the narrative? If you do have to go back and make updates, you'll want to do that in like the final edit. If you're posting like a web serial, like I know we talked about, you can always go back and kind of sprinkle that in. But you'll want to use as much of your world as you can to solidify them in it as fast as you can. One of the examples that we have is a little outpost called Costed in Yarlathep. So the girls in Costed are all hunters, and they don't like material wealth. They barter in necessity, and they're a very tight-knit clan. So when you run into a Costed girl, she might not want coins or bells. She would rather, like, if you found spices or herbs or have meat to trade or something that she can actually put to use and then kind of use it for the greater good, that's already like within their character development. So we know that's going to affect them. Costed is also very, since it's out of the way, they don't get a whole lot of communication with the outside, so they might be a little bit awkward. These kinds of things will play into your characters as you like sit them into the place in your world.
With that said, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step. Don't worry about fulfilling a checklist. Let your characters be people. What do we mean by that is try to focus less on filling a quota or filling a specific trait within a story. A lot of media nowadays gets really caught up with that, trying to, in the best way possible, to include as many different things as possible. And this can take away from the narrative if you feel like you're forcing it into it. If your character happens to be a particular race or be of a particular sexuality or any other trait that can show up in the story, it's best to always write the story that you want to write and write the characters that you want to write. It's always going to flow a lot more naturally. It's always going to feel more punchy when your characters do good things or do bad things. It'll create complexity between them. Because a lot of times nowadays you can tell when something is shoehorned in or thrown in for the sake of itself. So our greatest suggestion is to just write the characters you want to write the trials you want to write.
And I will say too, with all of this, this is like very, very true and very forward for self-publishing. But if you're looking at doing traditional publishing, unfortunately, you're going to have to be looking at that checklist. Traditional publishers and agents are looking for what's selling right now, and you're going to be writing pretty much what's selling and pitching what's selling. So unless your name is like Brandon Sanderson or Stephen King and you can essentially get away with murder at this point, like this, if you're going the traditional publishing route, you want to check in with what that agent was looking for, what the publisher is looking for, and kind of write or twist your story based on that. So all of our advice is coming from like a self-publishing standpoint. Creamy said you've never heard discovery writers. So discovery, it's a lot like pantsing, plantsing, and then like planster, but we like the term discovery writers because as we go through the story, we actually learn more about our world and we discover more about our world and our characters as we write, instead of having like a very detailed outline that we stick to. The next check is build diversity with your world's elements. So Brandon Sanderson does a really great job of creating a ton of different cultures and all of these elements that are really interesting and specific to his world. For example, the safe hand. So like all of the girls have one of their hands covered, and if it's uncovered, it's like, oh my gosh, like how can they look at her safe hand naked? He's got a whole race of people whose eyebrows grow like through over the back of their ears. Like there's a lot of options for diversity that you can stick out with.
And when, of course, you need some inspiration, you do some research.
So if you're looking for inspiration, I absolutely recommend doing some research on real world cultures, religions, people that have actually existed to help inspire them. Hey, Dreadnought. Um, I do this instead of asking like ChatGPT, hey, can you like make me some races of people? Just because if it's rooted in the real world and there's something that you take from the real world, it tends to feel a little better, even in fantasy. So there's a ton of cultures out there and a ton of different time periods that you can take of. Wikipedia is a good start for it, but I also recommend websites like Open Library and Libby. Both of those are free tools where you can actually check out books and scholarly edited articles where you can read more on it than just what's in the Wikipedia article. Sometimes it's kind of a crapshoot whether it's going to be legitimate or have good references. Or you can go to Wikipedia, scroll all the way to the bottom, and try and find the references that they use and read the original.
Yep, like the guy who's standing right here. This is Janusz, which there was a great deal of research put into Polish culture, religion, idioms, how they go about their day-to-day life, because that's going to reflect on Janusz and how he approaches situations, what curses he chooses when he's frustrated. It works as a great way to help develop his his basic structure as a character.
Yeah, so I did a Patreon post a little bit ago. Like, I actually picked a city where he was from, and then I researched the city, and I researched the history of the city and kind of what everyone's thought process are. There was, like, towards just in general history, towards family, towards religion. I looked at the geography to get an idea of, like, where he was coming from geographically. I tried to look at kind of their armor and what armor they would have and kind of where they're from and how they look. What weapons they use. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did this with Kritik as well. And another example that I was explaining to Ray earlier would actually be like my grandfather. So my grandfather grew up during Great Depression and then the Dust Bowl. So we put our glasses upside down, and there's really no reason to put our glasses upside down, but my grandparents did it because the dirt would get underneath there. So these are traits for people, like real people, that they have these habits, and that's what makes them feel real. Like, these are the things that you learn.
Because it sounds small at first, but even just the simple act of how a person walks, or the little flinches that they have when they're presented with a tough situation, or like she said, turning the cups over, that adds a lot to their character right there. And they're really simple things too that most people would think nothing of.
All right, so next we're going to talk about writing different points of view.
Okay, so to make sure we got this, to make sure that everybody understands this, first person refers to I, me, my. So that's as if you, the person yourself, were telling the story. So I sit there and say, I walked through the door. I picked up the plate of food. I looked longingly into her eyes. Second person would be as if the narration is speaking directly to you, kind of like if somebody wrote you a letter and they said, hey, I'm thinking about you every time I'm doing the dishes. I really miss your touch, blah, blah, blah. Third person would be a person outside of the group who is simply portraying the events as they are witnessing them. So they'll use they, them, their, she, her, him, and you could think of it more like a bard recounting a tale that he heard.
Hey, Miko, and who else we got? Hey, Carmine. Yeah, this is Toasty's art. Toasty drew these beautiful eyes. Also important to distinguish with third person is there's third person limited and there's third person omniscient. So third person limited is you are still kind of first person where we are following one single character and all we can hear is their thoughts and all we know is what they know. Third person omniscient is like you can hear every character's thoughts in the room. You know exactly what's going on and you're reporting that back to your reader. If you want to tell the story from different points of view, both Ryan and I recommend doing third person limited. It's just a lot more forgiving.
With that in mind, if you are attached to the idea of first person, that's actually how I liked to write my stories in the beginning. That's how I initially wrote Drive. So you hear how Ryak refers to a lot of his experiences. He has a very scientific mind and understanding of things. If you're going to do something like that, first person can be very, very difficult to write in when it's multiple points of view, and it can be very confusing to the reader. So if you are going to use a first person point of view, but you do want to tackle other people's perspectives later on, we recommend that you pick one person to be in first person and the rest of the characters are in third person limited. That still helps create some mystery.
So with any point of view at all, whether you're doing first, second, third, you're going to be taking the experience, lives, hobbies, backgrounds, everything into account when you're writing from that perspective. We tend to all intimately know our main character, but do we have the same knowledge for the others? So when you come to decide that you're going to do multiple points of view, you have to really consider, like, do I know all these other characters as intimately as I know my main character? Like, do I feel what they feel? Do I know what they experience? When you swap, you have to consider whether you're actually swapping characters or if you're just swapping camera angles. What that means is, are you actually looking at this scene from this side character's point of view? Are they experiencing it in a way that is relative to them? Like, are they seeing it in a way that that character would see it? Or did you just jump to them so that you could get like another angle on the battle and you're describing it the exact same way? Because at that point, it doesn't really feel like you're swapping characters. It just feels like you're swapping the angle.
I'll go down the list of questions real quick we got here. Term asks, would he and her be third? Yes, it would be. The best way I can think to kind of explain it is, imagine you're trying to tell a story to your friend. If you say, oh yeah, I did this, I did that, I went to the grocery store, that's first person. If you're sitting there and you say, oh yeah, I saw my friend the other week and he went to the movie theater with his girlfriend, they did this, that, and the other, that's third person. You're telling a story that's outside of your experience. And then Lady Toast asks, if you have multiple characters, how often would you switch perspective? That's going to be dependent on how important the events that are taking place are. You'll want to be careful not to do it too quickly because you can create whiplash with the reader. I have read in several books before where a single chapter will swap between 2 or 3 different characters. But typically, from my experience, that's usually when something dire is happening, like we've reached the climax of a story, and they're all doing really important things at that moment. So you'll usually, if you are going to switch chapters, basic rule of thumb is to use chapters to separate points of view.
Yeah, so I agree with Rye absolutely that swapping during chapters, like for the full chapter being in that person's perspective, is better. It's kind of a staple in epic fantasy when they have a lot of chapters or characters, like Game of Thrones switches it per chapter, Brandon Sanderson switches it per chapter, Joe Abercrombie. Sometimes they'll keep it in the same character for a few chapters just to like get that arc essentially done and then move on to whatever else is happening. So it kind of depends on whatever's happening like in the story. But my personal opinion is it's better to set up the fact if you're going to start switching early. So don't wait like 40 chapters to start switching characters. Ours worked out because the whole first book is Matt and then the whole second book is Matt. And then like immediately at the beginning of the third book is when we swapped it over so we could start introducing, hey, this is going to be different. Like we're actually going to start switching now. So it was better like a gradual switch for the reader. Carmine asked, using third person limited, but I'm having multiple points of view. I'm limiting the narrative knowledge to the one characters and trying to keep the other characters' knowledge more secretive. Right, do you want to take that?
So it depends. You can actually use that to your advantage since it is third person limited. There's no way the other characters are going to know what the other characters are thinking. So, at least most of the time. So you can use that to your advantage to try to keep secrets away from the reader. An important rule of thumb to remember too is that there's no way any one of your characters knows what the other characters are thinking. So whenever you're writing from a character's point of view, you can put the character's thoughts in italics, and that'll help emphasize, what they're thinking in that moment, what's going on in their head, and the other character has no way of knowing what's going on. You can use this effectively to, one example I can think of is if you opened up a book with the villain's point of view. I think actually one of the Harry Potter books does this. and it opens up with Voldemort's point of view. And you've got the snake going on. He's talking about like how he's planning to resurrect himself and such like that. But it's the only time you ever see that. And then the very next chapter switches to Harry's point of view, and you never see Voldemort's point of view ever again. So in that way, you can set a level of tension with the reader and demonstrate that, you know, there's stuff going on in the background that Harry does not know about. And so it makes it a little unnerving to see Harry's point of view and be like, oh God, if only he knew, you know, what was going on, he wouldn't be making these choices.
Also be careful with that, because you don't want to come off like you are purposely limiting information from your reader just to keep it secretive. So I don't want to say that's detrimental, but sometimes it reads in a way that's like the author is just hiding from me, like to hide from me. They're popping just to hide it. So you're going to want to feed your reader at least like little bits of information every so often, because everyone deserves a reward for sticking with it for a while.
One thing I can think of too is that when you do jump to these other characters' point of view, don't be obtuse and secretive with things that the character has no reason to be obtuse and secretive with in regards to themselves. What I mean by that exactly is that if you have an assassin, if you're trying to take the point of view of, like, say, an assassin, and he's planning to kill a king, he's not going to sit there and be secretive to himself and be like, oh yes, the one king I'm going to kill, or the one person I talked to. No, he's going to, in his own mind, he's going to be honest with himself. So you can start relaying information to the reader as a way of creating a climax, creating tension, creating an atmosphere, explaining like how this assassin's mental processes work. But if you take that person's point of view, somebody who's supposed to be making a big impact in the story, and you are just purposely hiding information despite the fact that we should be getting this information from this kind of character, then it feels like you're just hiding things for the sake of hiding things, and that can feel like you're cheating them.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide. So before I go over these, I want to talk about present tense versus past tense. So one of the things that I edit for, and I edit most often, is tense swapping. Present tense is when things are happening right now, right this instant. It is all present tense. Past tense is when you're talking like it happened before and I'm telling this story and this is what happened yesterday, instead of right now I'm drinking a glass of wine, or yesterday I drank a glass of wine kind of difference. Be very careful. Like, that's a whole nother thing I could talk about, but when you're doing tenses, pick one and stick to it.
With that in mind too, is just as a quick mention before she moves on to the next one, second person is one of the most difficult tenses to write in, one of the most difficult points of view. So typically speaking, we recommend against that. If you have to pick one, it's best to go with third person or first person. Second person can feel very personal, so use it with caution.
So I've written in second person all of twice, I think, and this was one of them. I did a retelling of The Red Shoes, which is an old fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, and I put it in a cyberpunk. So I approached the story by making the red shoes a chip that you could insert in your brain, and you would, like, every high ever, you would never have a crash. So I told it from the AI in the chip who was talking to the guy who inserted it. So I put this little spot where he's telling him, like, exactly, like, explaining to the reader what's going on, but actually, like, narrating the main character's actions. So the train's second stop is the Green District, where you take your leave, a place avoided by esteemed members of society with luxuries to lose, swarmed instead by the drivel who seek the unmentionable. You're one of them, though you seem to think you're above the rest of the rabble that shows their faces in the Green District. I assure you, you are not. So this isn't dialogue, it's just the narrator talking to the main character while also giving the reader information of, like, where he's going and what he's doing. But it's using you, you, so that makes it second person.
Let's see. Toe says, how would you deal with an unreliable narrator? Actually, that's very easy to deal with. The answer just might not be very obvious at first. We'll get into that a little bit further on, actually, so I will wait to answer that later.
Unreliable narrators are great. Now, like, Matt's an unreliable narrator.
He is. He's a very unreliable narrator, and you'll see why. We'll explain why in a little bit here. Okay, go ahead.
You can do this. It's Matt.
Okay. So Matt is a ton of fun for me to write. Matt, it's really, really fun to get into his head. First person past tense can be very intense because you have to capture that character's inflections. You have to capture that character's way of thinking. What do they focus on? What do they think about? What is sitting at the forefront of their mind? And with Matt, he thinks a lot. He can be a little self-deprecating at times. He wants to do better, but has trouble because he feels like he's constantly getting shown up. So it defeats a lot of his gusto to keep trying. But an example of first-person past tense is right here. I whipped around to the nearest cage of roaches, grabbing onto the bars with my good hand. I was determined to mince whatever was inside to shreds. What looked back at me was a cluster of furry green roaches, each sharing the length and build of a ferret. They had 4 ears and white glittering eyes, their heads adorned with a miniature rack of horns. Cannoli would love these. The thought drained all the fight out of me. This is a really tough moment for Matt. Matt's very frustrated. He doesn't care who has to suffer, what has to suffer. He's just angry. He wants to punch a hole through the wall. So even though he's looking at these really cute creatures, he's thinking, I couldn't care less. But then his motivation deflates as soon as he thinks of Cannoli. Cannoli is the first thing on his mind because of the struggles that they've been through, and he knows that Cannoli would really love these creatures. So then all of the fight is drained out of him. These are the things that Matt focuses on. At the end of the day, he is focused on really satisfying people. He really wants people to think the best of him. He wants to do the best for them. He's always got other people's concerns at the forefront of his mind. He'll throw away his own concerns at a moment's notice.
So I'll answer the unreliable narrator question because we don't have a slide based on unreliable narrators.
Okay.
Unreliable narrators essentially mean untruthful storytellers, but it can change your perspective on characters and other people because you are going through their eyes, and that doesn't mean necessarily that everything that they say is the truth. So the way I say that Matt is an unreliable narrator is because we are getting everything from his perspective and what his take on these things are. One of the really great examples I think for him is his perspective on Kailu. So right out of the gate, like in book 1, he's like, oh my god, I hate Kailu, and Raven's like, I hate Kailu. So readers are like, we hate Kailu, but they don't really know like anything about Kailu. They just know that Matt and Raven hate him, and that's enough, which makes him an unreliable narrator because he's not finding out anything else. It's just gut feeling like, screw this guy. So unreliable narrators are a good thing in that, just because almost everyone, especially in first person, is going to be an unreliable narrator. They shouldn't tell you every truth. They should be looking at things in their eyes, and that doesn't matter like if it's right or wrong. That's just how they perceive it, and that it makes first person really cool.
I will back up everything she said. That's actually why it can be such a fun way to tell a story, because you're seeing everything through their eyes. As soon as Matt says, I hate this guy, and Raven backs him up and says, oh yeah, he's a terrible person, I hate him too, you're already on board. You're like, oh, well, the main character hates him, Raven hates him as well, so I should probably also hate him. That's unreliable. You're just assuming that Matt has the correct way about it.
Yeah, so like you can always have the extreme unreliable narrator like Fight Club. If you've read or seen the movie, like that's like the pinnacle of unreliable narrators, because he has no idea what's going on, even to like onto himself. So there's a lot of great examples out there, but unreliable narrators are not a bad thing, and it doesn't always mean that they're sitting there lying to you. It's just that you're getting their perception through their lens, so it might not be the whole truth.
All right, and then I'll let you take this one. This is your work.
Yeah, all my homies hate character. Like everybody who's read the story right at first is like, nah, fuck Kailu. Like they just go with it. So I took this from Ophelia. Ophelia is my cozy mystery, and I really like this paragraph because it's a great example of putting a character in a time period, in a place, and you can hear it in her third person. Like, it's not first person, but it still uses plenty of terms and thoughts that will give you an idea of where she's at. So it's Julia worked through the evening shift, and Ophelia had slipped her a couple of bucks here and there for successfully keeping the two-bit Johnnies looking for a cheap detective at bay on more than one occasion. On the other side of the coin, Tiffany was a bleeding heart empathetic to every sob story that walked through the revolving door. She took it upon herself to suggest every lawyer, banker, real estate agent, and, of course, investigator in the building if she thought it would help a poor guy out. So this is when we talk about putting your narrative in a voice, like this is what we mean. Just hitting these notes that your reader will read it and go, oh my god, I can place this. Like, this is everything she says is in like the 40s, 50s, and you don't have to know anything about her to like see what's going on.
Yeah, the language alone tells you exactly what's going on here. You can be like, oh, well, these are a lot of terms that I may not be familiar with depending on where I'm from. You know, she uses the term buck, two-bit Johnnies. She's talking about cheap detectives. She says bleeding heart empathetic. These are a lot of terms and languages that you would experience from like the 40s and 50s. So it helps set that timepiece.
And the last one is Kailu.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I added this one because it is in perfect contrast to Ophelia. And when I talk about making sure that your narrative always sounds like the character, this is the kind of thing that I mean. So with Kailu, this is from the 5th book. And he just went into another cat girl's house. So it was small, very small. The entire building would have easily fit into 2 bedrooms of Kailu and Farah's West Wing, and the main room contained very few pieces of furniture. A circular table with 2 wooden chairs was placed in the kitchen area, and cushions were strewn across the front room in place of a settee. On the walls hung varying sizes of parchment, covered in colored paints depicting childish versions of buildings, cat girls, and encroachers. Daddy, I drew a Pukwudgie, Heike beamed over her newest painting. So Heike is his daughter, and he's looking around the room, and what he takes in is how tiny it is, first of all, because he had a giant castle, essentially, before he died. And then he notices the furniture, since he's used to very expensive furniture. He notices the drawings, because his daughter would color and paint, and he would frame them up and hang them. So these are the things that he's picking out versus what another character might pick out. Like, maybe another character would find it cozy. Maybe it would really resonate well with them, or like find it comforting. You have to look at these things through that character's eyes.
With that said, let's move on. Oh yeah, distinguishing dialogue. Okay, so this is extremely important, and this is what's going to mostly make your characters feel distinct and unique. Especially if you're switching narratives, this is going to be extremely important. Word choice is the greatest tool for distinguishing both narrative style and dialogue. A lot of times, Kat and I will sit there and say, well, how does each character describe a mirror? And we usually use Kiki, Cannoli, Saris, and Raven, and each one of them is going to describe it a little differently. They're going to have different word choices. Their background is going to determine whether or not they care about the mirror, whether they're looking past it, and so on and so forth. It also helps tell you a lot about what the character prioritizes, what their history looks like. And people will pick this up, whether instinctually or whether subconsciously or consciously. They're going to notice these patterns in their language. Like, Matt is very straightforward. He's just calling things as he sees it. Kylo uses a lot of older language. He's very sophisticated. He's very traditional. Tristan is very book smart. And he happens to be a painter. So he's going to usually describe things in ways that might relate to that.
One of the things that I tell people is to take the dialogue tags off of a section of your story and see if you can still see, like, if you can still tell who said what. So this will help you create more distinguishing dialogue between your characters. And I'm not saying you have to give somebody an accent and make it really drastic, just little things. Like we'll have an example in a couple of slides from Cat Girls just to show you what we mean. But you should be able to at least have an idea of who said that. And if you take it all away and it looks like one paragraph of somebody talking to themselves, then you might want to sit back and like reassess.
With that in mind, something we do like very much is listening to casual conversation and paying attention to not only what people are saying, but how people say it. Listen for their inflections, their word choice, their body language, the presentation of what they're talking about. Do they have a higher pitch to their tone? Do they have slouched shoulders? What are they wearing? A lot of these things will tell you so much about the character, and it'll also tell you about how they view things. Matt might describe in a couple of sentences like how Kylo is dressed. Guys, he might explain how he thinks Kylo's armor is gaudy and extravagant, and he couldn't care less what it looks like. It's got a sun emblem, who cares? Kylo and Tristan, on the other hand, they'll be more descriptive. They might explain like how the edges look, who might have made it, whether or not it's enchanted, and it might pose a more imposing figure to them.
And with all of this, you'll want to figure out how your character's background might affect what they say or their word choice. Like he was saying with the armor, if Kylo is very, very well versed in armor, so I find myself finding a lot of like armor anatomy and him using the correct terms for his armor, where Matt would look at it and go like, those are shin guards. Like, or like he doesn't know the names of things, so he might change it up. And Tristan might know if he read it in a book, depending on like where it's coming from that day. Portia and Agni are really good examples. Portia has kind of more of like a sailor accent because her dad was essentially a pirate, so she picked it up from her dad. And then Agni, since she's at the port all of the time, we were saying that a lot of the sailors in Yarlia would kind of have the same like accent. What do you call the girls that are not scrubby? Scrappy girls. I know, Jack. I know this is a very surprise, but like scrappy girl accents that just kind of travel around and it just gets stuck in your dialogue. Things like that. Like you can come up with these reasons for it.
Yep.
I know we have dropped a ton of information so far. Does anyone have questions? Need me to back up? Want us to go through something again? Detail it better?
Anything you guys want. This is for your benefit. So please don't be shy to ask questions, ask us to go back, whatever you guys need. Because character is, in our opinion, the most complicated topic.
Yeah, there's a lot here, and we know that there's a lot to say.
Chocobo says, do you have a character sheet for refresher on word choice or mannerisms? Actually, it just so happens we do. We have a world doc that we keep open for certain traits about some characters that we might forget later on. There's actually a character that I took a lot of pleasure in writing. Her name is Yanni. I'll be talking about her in just a moment here, who I have to keep extensive notes on because she's that kind of person. Let's see. Terma, I'm still processing. Okay. Need a second. Okay, looks like we're good for now. I think we can move on to the next one until anybody's got a more specific question.
Is this the blonde? So this is Kylo, Tristan, and Matt. Thank you for the hydrate. Honestly, like with the word choice, I don't need so much of a document for that. More like what Rai was saying, where Yanni, we have some stuff for her. I have a whole huge document I'm building on Sorsha's religion, decrees, hymns, her prayers, just because I'm making them up as we go and I need to remember them for later. But for even as many characters as we have, we've been writing them for so long that it's just kind of locked in now. So I know what they're gonna say.
Chocobo says, I think I am using a common vocab between all characters. Do I need to edit it out or modify? Possibly. So what's really going to determine that again is determining what your characters find important. Like for example, if they're all using the same vocabulary, well, they all could have come from like a very educated series of families. So maybe they've all got similar vocabularies for that reason. But with that said, they're all going to have different experiences. So you can help show differences between their character through what they observe, what their body language looks like. Look at something besides the word choice.
An example for that, we have like the whole island, She Island is all maid cat girls, but Rye did a really great job of like building them out, and we've together kind of like decided how each of them was going to react. In volume 5, one of the things that I wound up editing was a scene with Laura, because Laura was actually acting a lot more like her sister in this scene, and I'm like, I don't know if she would do this. Like, this is more Destiny, so we just kind of updated it to what she would act like. And these are things that I think you find as you write these characters more and like learn them more and kind of fall into who they are as people and what they're doing and what their truth is and what they're following, and that it kind of all falls together in a nice puzzle.
Agreed 100%, because at the time we were still developing Destiny and Lara's personalities. We've got a good lock on them now, but at the time we were still kind of figuring it out, and that's okay. If it takes a little bit of time, if it takes a few drafts to get it right, there's no harm in that whatsoever. You're not going to get it right your first time.
Keep asking questions if you have them. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. All right. My sock puppet text. So, read the dialogue aloud. Does it sound like a puppet show? So in my brain, if I start reading and I can imagine my hands with sock puppets like saying something to one another, like, yes, the Church of Sorsha has been around for exactly 1,285 years, and we all are like, it doesn't sound like a natural conversation. It sounds like I wrote this script for a sock puppet show for the other kid to be like, oh wow, this is amazing. So if you're in that mode, it's time to sit down and start looking at how to make it more casual and feel more like a dialogue, which we're going to talk about here.
So is your character an active listener? Are they reacting to what the other person says? There's no wrong answer to this. It's about what your character finds important. For example, I'm actually just going to take the piece that we've got right here. When Matt and the other characters meet Magni for the first time, if I remember correctly, it's from Kailu's perspective. And Kailu pays attention to everything. He's noticing all of the cat girls. He notices the armor. He notices all of the fine details. And he's going to be paying attention to every single little word that comes out of Magni's mouth, because words are power to Kailu. Kailu is very, very good at insulting you in a way you may not realize, but Magni is equally eloquent in his language. This is also going to help determine like what the character finds important. If they're in a situation and they're talking, are they looking at the character? Are they just averting their gaze? Are they shy? Are they stumbling through their words? These are all really, really important traits that help the dialogue feel more natural.
Like us asking, is the character an active listener? It's fine if they're not, because that can also be a character trait. They could just be focused exactly on what they're focused on and ignoring the other person, and someone's going to get upset with that. So it's totally fine to have them however they're going to be, but there should be a reaction somewhere. So let your characters chat with one another to discover and uncover more. Don't be afraid to let them ask one another clarifying questions. This is something that Cat Girls has taught me a lot about with dialogue. I know, like, reading a lot of my older stuff, characters would always just kind of have the right thing to say, which it doesn't come off as genuine as if a character says something and another character responds with, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Because that's what we do. Like, we talk to people and we ask questions, or like, I don't really understand what you're trying to say, and make them spell it out, and maybe that's awkward for them. Maybe that becomes a point of contention. It's okay for them to have like a longer conversation than just like, yep, they got the message to the reader and now we're moving on, like my sock puppet show.
I am going to second what she said. This is actually very, very important because people are not going to understand one another the first time every time. There are several points, even in book 5, where Matt and can only have a conversation. They think they understand one another, and then they find out they don't, that they're right back at square one. And they have this conversation a few times because they're just saying what the other person wants to hear instead of actually feeling and being honest with one another. So it creates a lot of tension between each other, and they both notice it, but neither one is really willing to take the step forward to actually fix it. This can make your characters feel very realistic because they don't want to talk about it. And they're going to tell you whatever they want to hear.
All right, there's a bunch of text. Hang on. How do you ensure characters are relatable without making them too similar to each other or stereotypical? So don't worry about stereotypes. We've said this like a few times in different writers workshops too. You can absolutely build your character on an archetype or a trope, but you'll want to make sure that there is a flaw or something there. Like when we were working on your story, Chocobo, and we were talking about Leora, and I'm like, oh my god, she should totally love this and it should be killing her. Like stuff like that where it's very human and you can see it and it's relatable. So helping to make characters relatable, I think, really destroys whatever stereotype. Raven in our story is like a big fiery tsundere, but the fact that she has all of this trauma in her background and she's coping with a lot at the same time makes people stick to her like glue, because everyone has been there. Like everyone has skeletons in their closet. So don't worry about stereotypes.
I'm just going to second what she said. Worry less about the stereotype and worry more about just the character and the emotion that you want to display. You can, exactly like she said, Raven she is on its face typical fiery tsundere. She says baka a lot, but then once you get to know her and you understand her trauma, you're like, oh my god, I cannot believe what she's dealing with, and you learn her coping mechanisms as time goes on.
And then too similar to each other goes back to where we were talking about characters' truths. So decide what they are doing in life, like what is their main purpose in life. And if you have two characters that have two very similar main purposes in life, start dissecting them down and get to the nitty gritty and like, okay, why is he doing it versus why is she doing it? Like overall, I can say Kailu's whole purpose is to make Nearly a better place, and so is Matt's, but Kailu's is to effect of like making the whole world, where Matt's like, I just want to protect my girls and my island. So that drains it down.
And on the other hand too, you can use it to your advantage. If you find that they end up being super similar, you could have them create a really great friendship or a very great relationship. Like, oh my god, we connect on every level. We just think the same thing all the time. And then when they finally don't connect on something, that can create tension. Like, we were doing fine up until now. We always agree on everything, and now we disagree and they can't handle it. So you can use it to your advantage either way, if they're very similar or dissimilar.
Morgana, congratulations. It's absolutely awesome. Too many ums in the pitch comment. I'm glad. Yeah, so it is okay to have and likes. I know I'm hopping down, but it's fine if you have a few ums and likes and uhs, but sprinkle them in just so there's not reader fatigue. And then Dreadnought asked about an uncomfortable position where he's meant to ramble and sound incoherent, almost unintelligible, and use rapid use of and like. Okay, I feel like if it's just that one spot, that's not a bad thing, and that can mix it up and really show that they're breaking down. You can also break things up with ellipsis, or with they're starting, like they start to say a word and stop, and then they start saying something else, or some of it's italics where they're like emphasizing things that don't need to be emphasized. Like there's a lot of ways to convey that they're kind of having a breakdown.
Just as an example too, I'll give you two examples, one from another person's perspective and one from the person who's freaking out. If it's the person who's freaking out, if it's from their perspective, you can have them ramble on, and then you can create a paragraph explaining like why they're rambling on, and you can make it extremely distraught, like they're just so distraught with this and this and this and this, and then they go back to rambling. Or you can do another piece where if it's another person who's watching the rambling and it's from their perspective, they could be a little put off and they're catching some of what they're saying, but then they kind of tune out of it a little bit and then tune back in once they're ready to face whatever that person's saying again. You can break things up like that.
Exactly what he said. Toast asked you to like practice chapters, meaning like short bits of story that's not meant to release, just to learn the characters. Yeah, that's called the public chapters.
Yep. Welcome to the public chapters. That's the first draft. When we release the books later on, that is the definitive version. So you can count that as the final version where we figured everything out. We go through it, we talk about it, we discuss it, and say, oh, well, would the character really act this way? And then we'll edit and adjust as needed.
Like, we edit the chapters, obviously, before we put them out so that they can be the best they can be. But there's still times when every single book that we go back and we're making thousands of words of changes and making the characters feel more real. Or we found when we started, like when we had up to book 4 almost, and we went back to edit book 1, there were a lot of things that we changed, like Kiki being a total bitch and she is no longer. So stuff changes.
It was so funny going back into the first book and being like, God damn, Kiki's kind of mean actually. And she's not like that, like, as the books go on. Like, even in the public chapters at the time, Kiki had toned down quite a bit because we nailed down her voice. We figured out exactly like what we wanted Kiki to be. And we wanted her to be a very level-headed, very understanding kind of person who's basically got all their marbles. And she was just not like that. So we had to tone her down a lot before we released the book.
Hey, Nico. Very similar to web novels to become light novels. Yes, that's actually how Cat Girls is a thing. So Cat Girls started as a web serial, and then we moved it to the novel, and the novel is the concrete canon. Like, those are the canon stuff. Chocobo asked, what's the most significant change you've made to a character during revisions and why? Or have you been successful at discovering them organically? One was Kiki, and then the other one was Kailu. Like...
All right, do we want to give them the real story? Like how we originally conceived Kailu?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kiki and Kailu. Those two, absolutely. We already discussed Kiki, so I'll explain Kailu a little bit. So when we were writing the story at the time, it was meant to be more of a comedy, more of a tongue-in-cheek approach. So we thought, okay, you know what? Why don't we just really make Matt's life a hellhole? And we introduced Kailu, and he's this arrogant, suave, know-it-all who just can figure everything out. And the original concept going behind him is that we were trying to have fun with this, and we thought, you know what? Truck-kun takes so many people, and it's a meme at this point that Truck-kun just takes people to new worlds. It's a reincarnation story. So we thought, you know what? What if Kailu? What if the way he got to Nyarlathotep is that he was run over by a wagon, and he was just some stupid merchant. And now that he's gotten to Nyarlathotep, he's got a big head. He thinks he's all that, but he's not going to tell people the reality of like how he got to that world. And that was the original concept behind him. But he is starkly different from what we originally conceived. And we think that Kailu has honestly been made way, way better for it. He's a very complicated character now with a lot of issues going on. Same for Kiki, that we feel like she's a much better character than we originally wrote her. And you're going to learn this as time goes on. You're just going to, you'll have one idea, and if you are the kind of writers who get really enveloped with your characters, really enveloped with your world, and you're very passionate about them like we are about this story, you're going to find that they change right in front of you, and sometimes you won't even be able to understand why and be like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing this. Honestly, though, it's usually for the better.
Yeah, there's times where it's just you feel it out, and sometimes you get to certain scenes and you just feel it, and you're like, this is so right. Like, Kailu became my baby as I wrote him later on, and I made him more serious and like gave him more gravity. And just like, he could be a really cool freaking character. So we made him a really cool freaking character. But yeah, Rise, 100%, he was going to be dead by wagon. And yeah, I know, right, wife, like, kept the wagon bit, but now it makes more sense, like, how he died and how he got there and why he's angry. And he's, like, one of the best characters I've, like, ever written. I feel so happy with him. But...
yeah, I am thrilled with the kind of character Kailu has become. And yeah, Dawn, I think it would, yeah, the wagon bit would have still been funny, but yeah, we We're too attached to Kailu at this point to change anything about our original concept.
Even Matt started off as more of a dumbass than he is now.
Yeah, like even going back into his past chapters, I really wanted to help paint why Matt ended up the way he was when he got to Nearlia, and it's been a lot of fun writing his past chapters. I think they'll resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, Rai has done a really great job building Matt up and building his past up, and it's all very visceral. And when we started, he just like, he couldn't understand anything, so we toned that down for him. And then the girls around him were just evil. Like, why don't you know that that's common knowledge? Like, why are you so stupid? So we toned that down. Like, there were so many changes that happened in the first two books.
Oh my god, in the original, they treat Matt like a complete dumbass. Like, they expect him to know things there's no way he could know.
Carmine asks, what's the best way to ascertain a character's feelings and perspective when you aren't familiar with their situation? So, if you're not, like, if you're trying to for example, like, have a character that goes through something that you've never been through, that's when I would recommend research, maybe talking with someone if you know that they have, and if they're okay with talking about it. But there's also, Google is like your BFF, so look up those situations and read through people who have been through it, like, see what they're feeling. And sometimes, I mean, there's certain things that you can kind of assume and then up to a degree. Like, obviously, I have not lost a husband or a wife, but I know what loss feels like, so I could really amp that up for Kailu and like understand where he's coming from and why he feels so lost.
Yeah, this is going to depend on the writer. Me personally speaking, I can't really write a character without trying to put myself in their shoes pretty much 24/7. It comes naturally to me, but I know for some people it doesn't, and that's totally fine. That's where you're going to want to research if you don't understand. But usually what I'll try to do is I'll try to pull from a similar experience, something somewhere on the same line. Like, okay, they're upset because they lost someone or something. Okay, I'll try to like pull back a memory where I lost something or someone and use that as a reference. And if I'm not able to, then I'll research it. But you'll learn a lot about the human experience and how people deal with things. Like, do they shake? Do they tunnel vision? What are they thinking about? Can they think? Are they just so overwhelmed with grief that they can't even talk? You'll learn how to do that over time as you write these characters more and more, and they'll start to feel like they're a part of you.
I always asked about how we deal with killing a character. Is there a point where a character becomes too important in plot armor? We do not believe in plot armor. Honest to God, the only plot armor that is in Cat Girls right now is Saphira, because I fear you guys. We took Saphira out of the story.
I have to raise my hand and second that. Saphira is probably the one character we're terrified of doing anything to, so she's safe. I cannot say the same for anybody else, but I will say, as far as like, is there a point where a character becomes too important? I like to refer to Game of Thrones whenever it comes to this sort of thing. If you're going to kill off a character, I'm not going to tell you to stop or not to do it, but you need to have a purpose or a plan after that occurs. If you don't have anything else after that, it's going to come off to your audience, your readers, like you just put it in there for shock value. And that there was no plan after that. It's like, oh yeah, we got him. Now what? I don't know. I just thought it would be funny. So we would very much recommend not doing that. If you are going to kill off a character, or if you're not sure which character you're going to kill off in a situation, try to have some general idea of what's going to occur afterwards or why this is important.
Creamy said walking that line is very scary. Oh, so yeah, again, like if you haven't gone through a car accident, you can always look up. There's lots of people, like I've been through a car accident, Rye's been through a car accident, who have accounts online. Like people post everything on Reddit now or YouTube videos, so it's great. The other thing I had Chocobo pick up this week is the emotional thesaurus. So the emotional thesaurus is a really awesome little guide that has a lot of emotions in there, along with um, obviously other words that you can use for it. But more importantly, it also has the physical kickbacks of certain emotions, and the physical kickbacks if you hold on to a certain emotion for too long. Like it's really great because if you've never felt this, then it actually has a list in there, so you can kind of get an idea. And I'll pull that up.
Choco asks, so if you kill Matt, who's the main character? Probably Tristan. If I had to pick a character, yeah. Kylie was just the way we want to tell his story is pretty jaded. So we think that taking his perspective probably wouldn't be in the best interest of the reader. Especially since if they're coming off of the heels of Matt's perspective, Tristan is going to be more in line. That would be probably where we would go with it.
So Toast asked, if you work as discovery writers and find killing a character is either needed or just comes up organically, do you need to come up with said plan or just stop writing? That depends on the character. We've had a couple where we were like, okay, this needs to happen or else X can't continue. Like the plot will not move if they're still alive. So we had to sit down and decide it. But there were a couple that it was just like, oh shit, like it makes sense for it to be right here as much as it sucks. And we were already in the chapter, so we wrote it in.
We've also had lots of contingencies in case certain big events occurred one way or another. So regardless of what the outcome was of big battles or relationship goals or anything between the characters, 99% of the time we had a contingency plan if it worked out in a way we didn't expect.
Mako said, something I've struggled with at times is having a character go through development and then going back to write a scene before that took place and having to forget the development to write them as they were. So for us, like as characters develop, we don't skip scenes like ever. So we're always writing scene after scene after scene. So I understand that there are some people that actually like write separate scenes and then combine them. If that works for you, then yeah, I can see that happening and then like not remembering to update it. So make sure that like when you put everything together and you do a read through, your final edit is really the frosting on the cake, I think, because that's when you're going to sit down and start actually making it consistent.
With that in mind, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Okay. Everyone get up, stretch, take 5 minutes, get some water, because I need to go get more water. And we will be right back. 5-minute break. everyone to take a deep breath and breathe. And remember that writing is fun and we love it. Thank you. Also remember, even if you don't believe me with the 3 million words that I've written, Cat Girls is 700,000 words long so far. So we have learned so much in 700,000 words as writers. Like, I even went back to Drive today, the original Drive that he wrote, and was like, oh my god, I'm so much better than this. And I felt the same way about my own books. So it is an art and it is a practice, and it will take time, and that's fine.
I'm going to second that and just instill within you that it's going to take a ton of practice. We've been doing this for about 3.5, 4 years now with writing Cat Girls. And while we've always liked writing, I went to Drive to try and find a piece that I could use for today's panel. I didn't like anything. And I didn't feel like rewriting anything because I can do it so much better now. And it's okay. You're going to find out that you're the same way as time goes on. You're going to write something, you're going to come back to it a year later and be like, oh, I can do this much better now. So just keep that in mind. You're just going to keep practicing and practicing, and you'll just get better at it as time goes on.
Thank you for the congrats. It's really crazy to think about. Like, since 2019, I've written so many words I could explode, and then Rye swapped in 2021, and he's written just as many. So it's worth it to keep practicing because you will always learn something new. Chocobo said, how do you decide the length of chapters that primarily function as setup for later action, and how do you keep these chapters engaging despite their expository nature?
Okay, I'm going to have to reread that a second time. Give me 1 second. Let's see. How do you decide the length of chapters that primarily function as setup for later action, and how do you keep these chapters engaging despite their expository nature? So, I'll just speak for myself. So, it depends on what's going on. Like, when we were writing a particular fight scene that a lot of you are familiar with that happens in Volume 5, that was something that me and Kat both had a hand in because we wanted to make sure it was perfect. We knew that we had been leading up to it at that point, so we knew it needed to be big. We knew it needed to be satisfactory to everybody who read it, and it needed to be very tense. So when it occurs, it's not a surprise that the chapter is anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 words in length. It doesn't come as a surprise at all. What ended up being a big part of setting up that fight was honestly a lot of flashbacks on two of the characters' perspectives, Kailu's and Naima's specifically, and how they portray and acknowledge the character that's going to be involved in the fight later. So when it comes up, it's not really a surprise to the reader that this finally is occurring. But many of those chapters that had led up to that point weren't any more than, say, 1,500 to 2,000 words a piece, because usually we write our chapters in smaller chunks. So as long as you're setting the right pieces, as long as you are sprinkling it every once in a while, you are hinting it, you're leaving the breadcrumbs every once in a while, being like, oh yeah, remember this asshole who did this thing? As long as it's occasionally brought up within reason, it's not going to come as a surprise when something big occurs. It's going to be very satisfactory when you finally hit that point.
So I'm going to tell you something that sounds like the most obvious thing in the whole wide world, but this is one of the biggest things that I learned after writing my first 2 books to learning now. Readers really like story. I know that sounds like it should be fucking obvious, but my first book was only 40,000 words because I just kept going from action to action to action to action. And now sitting down and reading it, I'm like, there's so much exposition that could go in here. Like, I didn't have time to world build. I didn't have time to like build a lot of these character relationships. And Cat Girls like taught me a ton that people would come back and say like, oh man, I really wish I could see more of these characters interacting, or I love these slice of life elements, or these like scenes where it's just Matt and his girls chilling out on the beach. Like, people want to see them just hanging out and like living life. And that took me so long to get through my brain because I always thought everyone just wanted the action and wanted to see the exciting parts and get through the exciting moments. So if you feel like you have a chapter or you have characters that could talk and actually build something up to like a main event, that will either twist the knife or will make it more epic or have people on their seat, add it in there. Like, you can always build your characters and build your world that way. So it's okay to have slow points and giant action points.
I'm gonna second everything she said and just add to it a little bit. A book filled with literally nothing but major plot points is boring. It's stressful, and it sounds like the story can never calm down. You're gonna find out that a lot of people they absolutely adore, myself included, the smaller, more quiet moment-to-moments that happen, exactly like she was just saying, like Matt with his girls, and just, you know, having conversations between some of the characters. Maybe they have a misunderstanding over dinner, who knows? But those are aspects of your story that will help your characters feel more human, feel more realistic. Even though we are writing for genres, regardless if you're writing for sci-fi or fantasy or what have you, sometimes I don't like to refer to the genre much because life doesn't have a genre, you know? So the characters are going to go through tough times. They're going to have fun times. They're going to have tense times. Moments where they can finally calm down for a few chapters and enjoy what's going on and get to know one another better. And those are great chapters. Those are nice chapters to help people ease into the story for a little bit and explore what the world is made of and how its culture lives and breathes and how the characters deal with day-to-day situations.
Tarma, I'm gonna keep telling you this. Your brain's not stupid, but your story will never be the perfect on the first try, ever. No matter what you write, it will never be perfect on the first try. It will never be perfect on the last try. You can only make it to a point that you're very happy with it and ready to let go. And that's fine. That's good. That's perfect. That in itself is perfect. That's perfection that you want to hit.
I agree with her, because even at the very, very end, even if you're on your deathbed and you have like 50 years of writing experience behind you, what are you gonna do? Just rewrite the story all the way from the beginning because, oh, I know more now than I did back then. You can't. That's an unrealistic take to have, especially on an art form as intricate as writing. You're always gonna find ways to improve. So it's not going to do you any good to dwell on it and be like, oh, I could have done that better. I could have done that better. Could have done that better. Yeah, but you've learned. You have more skills, and you can write newer stories with the material that you've learned from.
We barely just wrote the chapters for Volume 5 last year, like 2023. So I keep saying last year, but you know, it's 2024 now. But in 2023 is when we posted them, and we still made all kinds of edits that feel so much better and so much more in character and like they should be there because we learn over time. Traileon, thank you very much for your compliment. We appreciate it. I was gonna say something else. We had talked about Saphira, and like people get really upset if we don't check in with Saphira. So Saphira in Cat Girls is literally just like a side character farmer girl that is just raising her own farm and doing her own thing, and she's super sweet, and she has nothing to do with like the plot, but everyone
very
is worried.
Family oriented.
Yeah. We'll get really upset if we don't check in with Saphira. So every like 40 chapters, we have like a check-in with Saphira.
Just to make sure you guys know that she's still doing okay. She's still on her farm. Life moves on.
So I think too, with what Chocobo said about not helping the plot directly. So there's two things that you want to advance in storytelling: your characters and your plot, both of them. So if all you're doing is advancing your plot, then you're missing out on your characters. Those slower chapters are where your character development is. Even when I write like the not safe for work scenes, every single one of them I feel can only go in there if I am going to make some kind of character development, whether that's for Matt or the other girl or whoever is participating. I feel like it needs to move the bar on their person somewhere, like something needs to change for them. So when you're writing these scenes, check in with yourself, like not safe for work, any scene. When you're writing slower scenes,
check your not safe for work scenes.
When you're writing the slower scenes, just check in with yourself and see, like, am I building this character? Am I introducing more of them to my reader? Like, does it matter that they know more about this? So like Neko said too, like Neko loves the slower scenes. He loves the slice of life stuff, and all of his characters have like super adorable slice of life artwork and just little things that they're doing, and that helps build your world and move your plot too.
I'll say two things in regards to that as well. One, there's always going to be a group of people that are convinced that if you are not moving the plot forward, you're wasting your time. There are a lot of people who have criticized works because the plot slowed down for a little bit and the characters were allowed a moment to breathe, and they didn't like that. And that's okay. If they don't like that, they don't like that. But you'll have to understand too that even if you do everything perfectly and the story comes out immaculate, it's a beautiful work of art, 10 out of 10 stars, there's going to be somebody out there who didn't like the slower moment to moments, and they didn't like that. But you will be using those slower moments to help, exactly like she said, expand your character's depths. This is the moment where the character gets to breathe for a moment, and you get to see them do things that aren't plot relevant. Like, okay, so what does Kailu do when he doesn't have to fight Defiled? What does he do? Does he relax? Does he have a glass of wine? Does he go to the tavern? Does he find a cat girl to hook up with? What does he do? This is important. It helps you understand the character and how they handle every situation, whether it's a slow-paced situation, whether it's a plot-driven situation. These are important.
Yeah, exactly what he said. They're very important to building your world, building your characters, and then exactly what they're going to do in the plot. Because these situations can change them too. Like, they could make them look at something differently, like a conflict that comes up later. Just something that one of the characters could have said to them could resonate with them and stick with them more. So it all goes back into this nice circle of storytelling.
That's right. There's even a section that happens between Matt and Connolly that I won't mention for some of our newer readers, which, creates some tension, and it is extremely plot relevant at the time. And all the character development that happens in between it helps them deal with the plot relevance that comes up later on when they have to deal with methods of her faith and so on and so forth.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the last couple of dots on this slide. You guys feel free to keep asking questions if you have them, and we will keep answering them. The limit ellipsis kind of comes up with the limit use of and like. There's a lot of different ways to portray a pause in someone's dialogue. You can use em dashes for interruptions. You can use commas in between words like I don't know. You can use an ellipsis here or there, but try not to like every page have it nothing but dots. It gets to be very, very overwhelming sometimes. I can send you the PowerPoint, Creamy. I'll just save it and send it to you when I'm done as PNGs if you don't have PowerPoint. And then the last one is going to break Sky's heart if he were here. And that's take care with long-winded monologues or speeches. So
let me take this one. So if you've ever had a conversation with a person, and I know most of us have, there's a lot of times where you're going to be interrupting the person to give your 2 cents, or somebody else in the room is going to. If there's like 3 of your friends, 4 of your friends, if you're in a small group, if it's even just you and one other person, you're gonna find any chance you can to talk when you have something to say that's relevant. If a person is just standing there and they're marching side to side, they're pacing the room and they're going on and on and on and on about how everything they did was for the greater good, are you really just gonna stand there the entire time looking at them, not interrupting with a single word of your own? No, it's not going to happen. It's not a natural way to talk, and it's not how people converse with one another. If somebody says something and you have information contrary to it, you're going to interrupt them at some point. You're going to inject your own 2 cents. That's just how human conversation works. Now, there can be exceptions to this rule, and you can use it to your advantage as well. There might be characters who have a tendency to ramble, who have a tendency to say a lot, and the other characters around them are aware, and they're just like, when he starts talking like this, it's best to just nod your head and hum to yourself and just let him carry on. You can use that to your advantage every once in a while, but you'll want to use that sparingly, because most of the time, that's just not how people can talk. That's just not how people converse between one another.
Evil villain monologues are some of my biggest pet peeves, or hero monologues as they're trying to like escape or do whatever, or just drive me insane. Like Carmine said, keep talking while I load my gun. just like leave or kill him or do something. Like, why are we wasting time to listen to them talk? Oh no, Creamy's like shaking in his boots. I cannot stand them. Oh no, Creamy, we're gonna have to do so much work, honey. Yeah, anime moment. I sit there and scream. Like, I know that that's so popular in movies and I've seen it in some books, but it doesn't make sense because I'm sitting there reading their monologue and like picturing what the other people in the room are doing, and unless it's like a class where a teacher is talking to them, like, what the hell are these other people just standing there staring at them, like picking their nose?
Yeah, if you now, given you can still make it work, but the situation has to be very specific. Like, if, for example, I've never seen the movies, but like The Godfather, I could imagine if the main mafia boss sits there and everybody is extremely scared of him. They're extremely intimidated by him. Every time they open their mouth, they're afraid they're going to get a gunshot in their mouth. If you're going to do that, though, just make sure your narrative makes a point for like why people are not interrupting. They're not saying something. You could even insert a simple sentence that says, when he spoke, you listened, and you never said anything otherwise. Easy. Very, very easy. So you can still use it, but you got to be very, 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 very careful with it, because that's just not how people talk normally.
There should be some kind of reaction, or I will now explain my master plan in extreme detail. Stand by and behold. Yeah, Chocobo. So, like, why?
Kailu wouldn't care.
Kailu would just ram you through with his sword. That's it, the end. Like, he's not standing there. We don't have time for this. Yeah, Godfather monologue makes sense, but even in a book, if the Godfather is monologuing, just like Rice said, you can put a little, yeah, I know, Stargo, we have to fix it. You can put a little thing of how your main character is reacting, like, we don't talk, like that, but talking means a gun to the mouth. Just, you have something there.
Well, that was a lot on casual dialogue.
Cool.
I am ready to move on to the next slide.
So earlier we said that we were going to do a little dialogue test. So this is a scene in volume 4 that I really love from this chapter, and I took out the names. So you should do this with a few sections of your book and see if you can actually figure out who's saying the words.
I would actually like to see if any of our readers can point out who has said which things. I'm very curious to see.
How do you want to read this?
You can go ahead and read it.
Okay. We moved from cackerel to cackerel, asking if they'd seen a golden beetle flying around. Instead of anything helpful, we received weird looks and cackles, some of which I'm sure were on the verge of psychoticism. I'd be reacting the same way if I was in their shoes, she admitted with a strained chuckle of her own. I mean, who the hell keeps a beetle as a pet? In a desert? Baka. I know, I said, massaging the bridge of my nose. And would you please remind me why we're doing this? Her tone snapped back to sarcastic and she tugged her long hair over one shoulder. It was a half-baked idea, but it was an approach that helped us on She Island. The more people out here we get on our side, the easier it should be to get inside. But they can't help us get through the gates, she said, squinting her eyes. Someone raised a finger. Not directly, no. However, word spreads quickly. Another island's man doing the work Magni should be doing could force him to respond. I gave her a weak thumbs up. Bingo! But she blinked. Bingo? I sighed. Never mind. So...
The first speaker is wise. That's what Creamy says. Let's see. Jenna says Raven number 1. Matt number 2. Very good. Very, very good.
Matt, not Magni, is correct, yes. And you do see a baka. Number 5 is cannoli. Yep, wifey got it.
Wifey got it.
And then who says not directly, no? Is this a Greek chorus? No. Good guess, but it's Saris.
It is a different blonde.
Saris and Kailu can speak pretty close to one another, but you have the same idea. Like, you get the idea that it's still that higher level of speech with more words than really necessary, but they don't use a lot of contractions. Contractions and not using contractions are one of like the easiest, cheapest ways to split up dialogue between two characters. So if a character doesn't use contractions, like instead of saying can't, you say cannot, that automatically makes them sound like more noble and more educated. It doesn't make sense why, it does. So that's already like a super cheaty way to do it.
Yeah, it's just how people naturally interpret it. Like if you look, like taking Data from Star Trek The Next Generation, for example, he doesn't use any contractions. It makes him sound very robotic, it makes him sound very logical. So you can use it to your advantage for a character like, say, Kailu, Tristan, or Saris, who have higher levels of education. But our point being, exactly like Jana and Dawn said, they guessed, like almost 100% across the board. You guys knew exactly what characters were speaking because they have certain inflections. They have a manner in which they say things.
I mean, Raven's a giveaway because all of her stuff is so fiery, plus she says baka and like Japanese words, and we know that's that's her. That's what she says. It's okay to have low-hanging fruit. Like, you don't have to look inside and really break it all up. It's just things like using contractions or not, having a different manner of saying things, like having a tick, having like Cannoli, where she's just very confused and trying to hold on to the conversation with like her whole freaking life.
Struggle says also nicknames. That's actually also very good because some friends and other people in relationships might have certain pet names or nicknames for one another. That can help you identify who's talking as well.
Next up is character knowledge.
Ah, yes, this is one of my favorites. So Yanni, I've been having a ton of fun writing. So character knowledge, one of the best ways to remember what each character knows is to focus on one story at a time, especially if there are multiple offshoots in the same world.
Yeah, sorry to burst everyone's bubble. I think one of the number one things that I hear from newer writers is that it is impossible to sit down and focus on one thing because you are always thinking of other stories. And I get it, because I constantly always have other stories in my brain too. But one of the best ways to remember how each character functions and what each character remembers is to focus on one story until you get to the end of it and actually like see it through. So that's one of my biggest pieces of advice, and I always feel like I'm screaming at kids to get off the playground and not eat the candy. But unfortunately, that's like one of the best approaches to it.
And always start small. One main character and 2 to 3 side characters to focus on. Explore the world through shorter stories. So, Cat Girl started off with just Matt, Kiki, Cannoli, and we didn't have a ton of information about those 3 characters. We just knew, okay, Kiki likes to swim, she's sporty, she's got brown hair, okay, done. And Cannoli is the sweet cinnamon bun, she's dainty, she's short, and she likes to do what's best in life. Matt, he likes cat girls, and all he can think of is having a harem. That is what we went into all of it with. And it helped us develop everything from the ground up. It helped us develop exactly like we were saying earlier with how, like, Kiki, she was a total bitch in the beginning. She was kind of the tsundere type until Raven came along. And then as time went on, we developed her more and more. And we're like, oh, you know what? Actually, you know, she likes archery. She likes swimming. She likes fishing. She likes sporty things. Let's change this, and this, and this. And then we went ahead and, you know, retroactively made some changes, and her character was fleshed out for it. Same with Cannoli, and same with Matt. And as time went on, we were able to slowly and carefully add more characters. We add Saris, we add Kailu, we add Raven, we add Magni, we add Saphira, and all the other characters that are important to their lives. So always start with a smaller group and expand slowly as time goes on as you need the characters.
So I know I said shorter stories, but honestly, you can do this with chapters. If you look at volume 1, like the first 9-ish chapters are all each like their own kind of instance thing where it's like they go fishing and then they go hunting and then they go do something else. So they're almost like, they remind me a lot of like the Konosuba episodes where they're just kind of hopping around doing different things. And those first 9 chapters helped us really like nail down exactly what we wanted to do with this world and where we were going to take it. And that's when we started really expanding it out. So you don't have to have those kinds of chapters if you don't want to. For us, it really helped. But getting at least like your first 10 chapters down, and then you can go back and kind of edit it if you want and like adjust it and make it all cohesive, helps a lot.
I will say too, keeping a place in the world rules document, because we always suggest creating a world rules document. For key items to remember or details about the world you want to revisit later, Yanni's memories, for example. So Yanni is a character that I wrote who is supposed to be on the spectrum a little bit. And she has a tendency to bookmark events in her brain. She'll file them aside for later and be like, okay, I'm going to bring this up some other time when it comes to mind. But she bookmarks them. And she can snapshot these memories at a moment's notice whenever she wants. Now, it's always going to be important to keep the important and more distinctive traits about the character on hand in your worlds document. I'm not talking about like simple inflections or anything like that. I'm talking about things that are very, very specific to that character, like Yanni snapping her memories. Another example might be Raven's trauma and why it's so important to her.
It's hard when you have a lot of characters like you guys do. Like Ryan was saying, we just started with the first 3 characters and then just kind of built out. Like, we have the town characters like Saphira and Nauka and Espada, but those just kind of count as side characters. And I realize I don't have a slide for side characters, so I'm going to make a note and we'll talk about outside characters a little bit.
That's a good idea. Yeah, Struggo, we started with only a few characters. The side characters were meant to just be throwaways, and then they ended up getting more development as it was deemed necessary. Granny Nauka is one example I can think of where she's an alchemy expert. And Kiki knows her. She knows her quite intimately, so does Cannoli. And they practice alchemy with her every once in a while, but she's primarily a side character who plays a little bit more importance in Kiki's side stories as time goes on. But initially, she was just meant to be a potions expert. It just so happened that she was in a good position for us to expand further.
It was really interesting because the first time that Kiki, Cannoli, and Matt meet Nauka, Rai had Kiki stand outside and stare in, and I'm like, why? And he's like, I don't know. So we honestly, like, we didn't have anything right off the bat, just we knew that something happened between Kiki and Nauka. So we left it there because we were like, yeah, that could be fun to play with. And we didn't expand on that until later. So it's okay if you don't have the full idea sewn yet. You can still set something up and then see if you can like develop that later on. Any chance we can see the early Kiki chapters at some point? I don't know if I kept it in the Google Doc, but if I did, I'll send them to you, Jack. I'll double check. I may have updated them.
I think they're gone. I mean, we can try and find them, but yeah, it would be fun to compare them. You'd see that Kiki is a very different person.
If you had a nickel for every story you read about a guy named Matt who had a harem, you'd have taken 2 nickels. That is weird. I did not know there was another one, and we got kicked out of Harem Lit, so I guess it's not technically a harem. Do you have and maintain characteristics for each of them? Neko, what do you mean? Because, like, the characters have characteristics, obviously, but we don't jot down every tiny little thing in our world rules document. I share this off pretty much every time, but let me show you guys.
While she's pulling that up too, we don't keep like biographies, like little dossiers basically. We don't keep that sort of information like height, weight, eye color, hair color. We don't keep that kind of information up. We keep the information up that is extremely distinct and specific to that character that could come up later.
Okay, so this is part of our rules document. I'm not allowed to show all of it, but for example, I have a whole thing of cannoli being in the church right now. So every time I talk about Sorsha and her background, I make sure to throw it in here. So I have it somewhere, like her 7 swords, and then cannoli at her school. I've got her friends, and I have her friends as descriptions because side characters are the hardest ones to keep track of, arguably. Like, I cannot remember when we jump around so many chapters and everyone has like 4 or 5 side characters. It is so hard to remember what they looked like and their background and which island they came from, even if we only have 5 islands. So I make sure to mention that. Rye was mentioning Yanni's bookmark. So this is like all of Yanni's memories that she has saved so that she can look it up later. And we have it all like we just keep it organized by headings. So that way, like, if I need to go somewhere, I can just click, like, I have Kiki's Costed cohorts because I wouldn't really remember what they look like here either. Things like that. Mostly just keeping character, like, overarching character traits for side characters, and then if the main characters have something that we really need to remember, like Sorsha information or Yanni's bookmarks, that goes in here too. Struggo, I definitely believe in naming all characters, especially if your character would know who they are. It just makes life so much easier to have someone, like, to be able to say Julia instead of the woman did this, the woman did that, especially if your main character would know who they are and has met them before. Like, hiding it from your reader, just, it feels like you're trying to hide it from your reader.
It does. It feels very unnatural. It feels very stilted, especially if it's a character they should know. Exactly like she said, you can even make it very simple. Just be like, Julia, a woman with long brown hair and eyes of caramel. I'm just throwing words out there. Eyes of caramel, childhood friend since I was 3 years old. Whatever you have to say. It can be 1 or 2 sentences just to let you know who the character is. It makes them feel more real and like they're actually important to that person. Because if you just say the lady, the woman, the guy, the man, the old man, it feels very impersonal if they're supposed to know that person.
The last note on this page. So overall, last night everyone asked me, like, character knowledge, who knows what. So the more you understand your world and the more you build it up will help you determine who knows what. So, for example, Sorsha's decree and her religion. So if one of the girls was raised in a very religious household, had constantly, like, celebrated Sorsha and had her decrees and her hymns going, they would be familiar with it. Whereas Cannoli, who didn't really have her mom around, but she wants to be a bishop, doesn't know a lot of the textbook things. So she's still kind of struggling with that and still learning that. That is a very overarching example, but knowledge for your characters, you have to kind of determine that with their background and if they would, so you get to decide that, or if another character is going to feed that information to them, or if it's something that they have to go figure out.
It's fun playing with this too, because you can use this to create mystery in the other characters' heads and make them wonder where they stand with certain characters in regards to their affiliations.
You can also have characters like Tristan, who is super helpful sometimes when we're like, okay, who would know this? Tristan reads.
You read books, you should know.
We can just assume, like, he has read a book and he probably knows this, and these are things that you'll decide on the fly, and that's fine. You read books, you can solve the economical crisis of San Francisco. Speaking of Tristan. Alright, inner thoughts. This is kind of a complicated one, so everyone does inner thoughts a little differently. We base how often to use them and whether they're italicized versus in the narrative on the character itself. So Matt does have inner thoughts, probably more than anyone else. Tristan, I think, is the second one. Kailu's falls into his narrative a lot, and with Kailu's narrative, I like to describe what's happening rather than just straight out saying what he's thinking, because it's more his character, it's more his style. Like, he doesn't really want anyone to know what he's thinking. He just kind of grins and bears it.
Fun example right here. That hurts like hot, like how Kailu thought. That's kind of a little bit unlike Kailu. This is more of a Matt thought. Just because of the way Matt approaches situations, he's a lot more in his head and thinking, oh, he might talk to himself a little bit more. Whereas Kailu is just very takes things as they occur. And if he got scratched by a branch as he was walking through a forest, he might grunt a little bit and then throw a bandage over it and think nothing of it. And you can portray that in the dialogue.
The dialogue, the narrative.
Sorry, not the narrative. That's exactly what I meant. Thank you.
Strago, you said that you hid Michael's name until the end of the chapter, so I wasn't there, but please, please, please don't just hide a name from a reader, especially if your character is going to know who it is, and should know who it is. And if your reader doesn't know, who that person is yet, it won't mean anything to them, or if they don't have a connection with them. I see a lot of people who start out a whole book, masking a name, and I'm like, I haven't met this person, so it's I don't have anything to combine them or hook them to.
I'm gonna second what she said too, because hiding the name of a person isn't really gonna have any effect unless it's supposed to be a big surprise about an already existing character, pre-existing character. I had a client who wanted to do something like this and reveal the name, and I was like, there's no point in doing this because the entire story is from their perspective. So it's okay, so now we know their name, so what? It doesn't mean anything,
All right, and then don't rely on inner thoughts too often to tell the reader everything. Even in the first person, it's good to leave a little mystery. This is also, it goes with the show don't tell. On the bottom, I say balance in all things, and this is, I mean everything. So it is okay sometimes to just tell. It is okay for them to just think it hurts like hell if it's going to be easier and you don't want to add 50 more words, or if you're trying to fix the pacing. There are so many things in writing that, once again, it's an art, so you kind of feel it out, and you feel if it feels like it's going to be way too much, or if it feels repetitive or redundant, then shorten it up. But don't spend everything oh, I can't believe she did that. Let your reader kind of feel along with you.
Internal questions. Be careful with internal questions. Limit it to 1 or 2. So you may have read in some books where they go, why would she do this? Why did he think to do that? How could he say that? Be very, very careful with doing that. There are much better ways to express that. You can express the frustration through the character's body language, their actions, their thought process. You can express it through how they discuss the situation with their friends and the other people in their relationships. But you can still use it every once in a while. Why would she do that? And then move on. Because these are already questions that your reader is going to be asking, and these are already questions that are inferred. You're already sitting there going, oh, well, this character has never done something like this before, and then they just did this thing to the character. Why would they do that? Your reader's already thinking that. So a lot of times you don't need to emphasize that.
Yeah, and it's just, when you ask too many questions in a row, it can kind of kill your pacing and the tension. Especially when you're trying to build tension, if it just keeps going, it's okay, I'm kind of losing you now. So 1 or 2 is good. First person narrative should always be in the character's voice, whether it's exposition, inner thoughts, or dialogue. This is kind of a rehash of what I said earlier about camera angles versus actually being in that character's voice. This is what makes it so freaking hard to write multiple first person points of view in a story. So since third person, you kind of have a voice for your third person narrative. First person is always going to be in this character's head, in this character's shoes, with this character's perceptions and background and history and everything that's happened to them. And are you ready to actually tell it from that character's point of view? So if you're not, then default to third person, because it is really hard to go and skip to another chapter and it's first person again, but I'm reading the same exact words and rhythm and timbre, and we're just changing the name.
Yeah, it's just not worth the risk. If you want to do multiple points of view, like 99% of the time, I'm just going to suggest that you do third person limited. It's a lot easier to manage since you don't have to deal with that person's voice. With that said, Jenna has a question. My protagonist has basically a person inside of him who typically will taunt and tease him. Is using italics for his speech okay, or should I use quotations? Sorry if it's off topic. Thought it would fit kind of under inner thoughts. You can do that a number of ways. You can do it in italics so long as you emphasize to the reader who's talking. Typically speaking, I prefer to use quotations and italics because it is a thought process and it is somebody else who is speaking and not whoever's point of view you're following. What's your take on that, Kat?
I am looking for that Destiny chapter that you wrote where she's just like putting herself through the ringer, because it's a really, really good.
This is something I tackle a lot with Destiny. Destiny is somebody who's constantly in her head and constantly discouraging herself. She's very self-deprecating. Bear with us for just a moment.
Okay, cool. So Destiny, he writes, is always having a fight in her head. So it's not necessarily a second inner demon or like a person inside of her. It's really just her that's having this problem. So how we formatted it is using italics. And then when it gets to a point where she's actually like fighting with herself, we just did paragraph breaks like we did with a normal conversation. So we would say like this and then split it down and then do this like the reply. So she's still in her head actually fighting with herself, but the paragraph breaks kind of associate it with a second voice that's like talking to her. That makes sense. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say. I don't like using quotations unless somebody is speaking out loud. Oh, thank you, Strogo. You're very, very kind.
Yeah, for yours, Dreadnought, quotations might work just fine because I have another character who has a sentient weapon who speaks to her constantly. And typically speaking, I will put it in italicized quotation marks just to let the reader know, hey, it's another voice talking, and it's not just a thought in her head.
Yeah, so if they're actually talking to themselves and it's the voice inside, you could do quotes and italics, like I said. Absolutely. If it's all internal, I like to try and kill the quotes just because, to me, as soon as I see quotes as a reader, I assume someone is speaking it out loud.
Most people will interpret it that way.
And hey, Sturgo, I mean, if you love the reveal and if it reads well, then keep it. Like, I wasn't there, I haven't read it, so I can't give my feedback. It's just like what I take away whenever I read like the man, but the main character knows who they are. So I'm like, why aren't they telling me? Like, where's the information? Hello.
The context is also going to be very important in how you set up the scene. If, for example, you said it's supposed to be Michael. I don't know where this takes place. This could be in heaven. This could be in hell. This could be, you could be setting the stage and the scene in a way that may make the reader feel like, oh, wait, this character who's hooded, they seem really important. Who could they be? Then it's fine. It's all going to be very contextual. But as just a basic rule of thumb, typically you don't want to just hide a name for the sake of hiding a name if nobody knows who that's supposed to be anyway.
Thank you, Carmine. That's really sweet of you to say. I'm glad. And if you guys need clarification or like you've been doing ask questions, like this is why we're here. We want to help. All right. It's very important. Please pay attention.
Please.
your character designs do not have to be overly detailed. They do not have to look like VTubers. They do not have to look like anime characters. In fact, if they do and everyone else looks normal, Ray's the one who's like, you start describing the one guy in the high school with the different hair color, it's like, there's the pro tag.
You see it all the time. Like, if you, like 90% of the anime, if you look and be like, oh, he's sitting by the window looking longingly outside at all the people playing sports, and he's the only one with jewelry and different colored hair. Yep, there's the protagonist. There he is.
We literally, Matt, I went on Pinterest and I'm like, anime boy. And there he was. And like, I just put him together and Ryan's like, green jacket. I'm like, cool, green jacket. He got it. And for some reason, added the red hair. Like, he thought it would be cool if he dyed this one streak of hair. Okay, fine. That's his endearing character trait. For the girls, I literally just wanted Nekopara Clamp girls. So that's where Kiki and Cannoli came from. And then Saris was like hot lady nightmaid. So it does not have to be overly detailed. What people are going to connect with are their personalities, their emotions, their approaches to situations. Like, those will resonate with your readers. Like, it doesn't matter if they have one stocking and tiny little tattoos around their stocking plus all these little piercing. Like, that doesn't matter.
Nobody cares. It's bloated design, and it's not important to the character. There are two things I go by. One, what is this character like? How do I relate to them? And two, how do they get dressed every morning? That is what I go by whenever I create a character design. Exactly like she said, Matt is just like, oh, let's just make him a, typical 20-year-old guy who's just really overly infatuated with cat girls. That's it. And let's just add a little red streak to his hair. Ta-da, done. Exactly like she said, Nekopara cat girls. Hot lady night. And Raven is just a hot witch. That was as far as we went with it. But people connect with these characters because of their personalities and how they approach situations. Their appearance is only part of what makes them human.
Creamy's a Saris guy. That is what I've taken away from this workshop.
That's totally fine. Saris is, no joke, one of my favorite characters to write. So, good taste.
Yeah, Strago, like, how they get dressed is the best question ever. Like, I love that. And the other thing is, how do you describe this to your audience? Like, I like pulling up VTuber designs and just trying to imagine exactly how I would tell this to the reader. And if it takes more than a paragraph, like, we're in trouble.
They jingle when they walk.
It's me. Red hair man looks strikingly similar. So Matt, that's Matt. Matt looks strikingly similar to a million protagonists. We just wanted a brown-haired anime protagonist, and we gave him a red stripe. And
that's literally it. We took inspiration from nothing. We just thought, hey, normal 20-year-old guy, and he was playing a lot of JRPGs at the time, so he decided to dye his hair partially because his mom would have freaked out if he dyed his entire head. So it was kind of a compromise.
We've actually had more artists come up with details on these characters than we did to start with. So, like, the freckle under Matt's eye was an artist that added it. And we're like, that looks great! That's canon now! And with Kiki's hair, Mount actually made it brown, and it looked great, so we kept it brown. Tristan's outfit was artist designed, and we've had artists that, like, build on it. We kind of let it go because it didn't matter really what they were wearing. We just wanted them to have an impact on people.
Yeah, exactly like she said. We gave just enough details so that the readers could interpret each of the characters in their own way. We didn't go expressly into detail, going like, oh, their chin size was exactly this big, and their eyes were exactly this sharp, and their breasts were exactly this big. Like, we didn't go into that extravagant kind of detail. We kind of just said, hey, here's a basic outline of how the character looks. This is what they're wearing. Voila, go wild. Interpret it the way you want to interpret it.
Yeah, when we say that we're very character driven, we're very people driven, and we want to see how they impact the story and the story how it impacts them. I've read a lot of books, a lot of lit RPGs, a lot of system apocalypse, a lot of first person stuff where in the first like 3 pages, the guy's like, I am exactly 5'10" and I have 200 pounds and I can lift 300 and I'm very strong. And I'm like, what is happening right now?
I don't need to know all of this, and I don't particularly care what the exact numbers are on everything. Most people don't. They don't pay attention to these things. They look at it one time and like, oh, cool, and they forget about it.
Yeah, and with Matt in our story, I think he mentions in the first chapter that he like washed up in his normal clothes, so he's still got his jeans and his jacket. And then I think it's Kiki who asks him about like the red streak. Like another person asks him like, what is that? How do you go about describing non-humanoid characters? That is a great question, Iki. So, not
Non-human characters. It's gonna depend. It's gonna depend on whose perspective I'm tackling, if they're the same race or otherwise. Because if it's from a different race of people, like just taking a sci-fi example, if it's a human talking to like an insectoid, well, they're going to express like how different they are, but it's also going to be contextual in the fact, in the manner of speaking, like, is this normal? Is this like a normal quote unquote alien? Like, how long have they known insectoids for? Or is this the first time he's seeing an insectoid? Because then he might be a little more descriptive than the average person. But again, that's going to depend on the character. The character might describe them a little bit. They might be more extravagant in their detail. That's going to depend on whose point of view you're taking.
Yeah, like the Defiled, all of the Defiled besides the first 3 that I made, because Rai is way more freaking imaginative than I am. Like every fight they go into, Matt or Tristan is explaining exactly what they look like because they've never seen it before. So we have to be really careful to try and get the description to be something that we were going for. If it's like Yomi summoning Belial for the first time, like she's never seen a demon like that, so she's going to describe it to the audience and like to the reader and kind of flesh it out. But just like Rai was saying, if it's a sci-fi where a human meets an insectoid and they've met this insectoid a million times, you can still slide something in like their pinchers always set me off guard. Something like you can add a little detail that tells your audience like this is not human, he is not really comfortable with this 100%. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
Kind of on the same topic too. Matt has to wrangle up a giant golden beetle in volume 4. And he refers to the creature as a giant beetle, as basically a giant lawnmower with wings. That tells you a lot about Matt's character and like how he likes to describe things. You can use that to your advantage too, to help not only just describe what they're dealing with, but also add complexity to the character's perspective.
Exactly. Matt has to wrangle a harem of cat girls. He doesn't really succeed. Once again, we got kicked out of Harem Lit.
I cannot express how quickly we got kicked out of Harem Lit. We are apparently not harem, so
I can't call this a harem. All right, before we get to the next slide, I'm gonna bring up Milady over here. Oh, where'd she go? Milady. There we go. All right, let's talk about side characters for a second.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
All right.
Just gotta hit the restroom.
No problem. Oh, where did she go?
She was on screen.
There we go. So, side characters are... Why isn't it a harem? Because apparently there are other dudes in the story that get to enjoy themselves and that kicked us out. And also the girls don't follow the rules. So, when we last posted there, people were quoting like chapter numbers that we broke. And they were like, nope, this does not belong here per chapter 214. Like, this is crazy. So, yeah, they kicked us out. It's not a harem. Yep, I did not know there were so many rules to harem. But, you know, live and learn. I'll wait till Ray gets back. That's okay, though. I don't mind. Like, yeah, so harem and lit RPG both want very formulaic stuff. So harem kicked us out, and lit RPG thinks that we sit at a child's table eating crayons. Which is fine, because, like, I love this story, and Rai loves this story, and you guys love this story, and that's really all we need. Justice is blind. Yeah. Maybe double blind. So yeah, harem rules is it's got to be one dude the whole time. It's got to be the same girls who are not allowed to have any interest in anyone else. They must be loyal, funny, kind, helpful, caring. Like there's a whole list of things they have to be. They can never, ever, ever have any other interest in anyone else, and there cannot be another dude in the story at all. Justice for cannoli, justice for cackerel. You know, I don't mind though, because like when I look at the covers and stuff for other books that are in those kinds of series, and I really hate when I scroll down on Amazon and it's like, the people who bought your book also bought these very boobylicious books, and I'm like, it's not like those at all. It's a completely different book. How do you explain the story to my wife?
It doesn't feel fair.
We have a lot of female readers and a huge female readership, and I mean, I help write it, so I like to think that we're really good at covering all bases, if you will.
So while the story does take primarily from the perspective of a guy who's basically just cat girl crazy and wants the harem of his dreams, we are very adamant about making every single character feel real, feel believable, like they have realistic goals and dreams. And she and I have always been very adamant about making all the characters feel that way. So we believe that anybody who gives the first book a try can find something to enjoy about it, regardless if they're a man or a woman, male or female, it doesn't matter. We think it appeals to a ton of people. We have exactly like she was saying, we have a huge female reader base who are basically just all obsessed with Magni.
What the heck, Jana, if you're still here.
I hope she is.
But yeah, like I tell people it's an epic fantasy lit RPG, and we connect with a lot of other women at events, and like we tried very hard to make the cover art look good across the board as far as like not I don't know, I'm losing words.
Too masculine or too feminine.
Yeah,
in either direction. Yeah, so we wanted to try to approach more of like a middle ground area. Admittedly, the first two books can be seen as a little bit more feminine. So admittedly, a lot of guys kind of look at it and go, no, not my cup of tea. So we usually end up pulling more women over with the first two volumes. But the volumes, that's intentional, and that it helps illustrate the severity of the situation as the story progresses. And you can see that reflected in each cover. The first one is like, oh, look, we're coming to this cat girl world. Look, Kiki and Cannoli are saying hi and welcome. And Raven is here, and it's lovely. And now Saris is fighting to save every cat girl on her island, and Naima wants to kill somebody, and Zara is going to probably fight her sister and kill her too. And that's how the covers progress. Just thinking of somebody who recently picked up our books, who was actually on the fence, is another female reader. She looked at the books and she's always been kind of on the fence. She's like, I don't know if I want to try it. But she recently picked up the first book, and she admitted to us earlier today that she had a hard time putting it down. She finished it in like a weekend. So we are very adamant that if people give it a shot, usually they'll find something that they like about it.
So yeah, buy Catgirl's books, but let's go back to characters.
Woo! Back to side characters.
So,
Saphira.
I wrote a whole blog post like 8 years ago about writing side characters and why it's really important. Side characters are just as important as your main characters at times. For one of the biggest reasons is because they all have their own lives, and they're all trying to accomplish their own goals. Oh, no problem. Good night, Struggle. Thanks for coming.
Take it easy. Thanks for tuning in.
So everyone's gonna have their own goal in life and what they're trying to do. So when you're writing these side characters, you have to remember that they're also going to have reactions and thoughts to things. And if your main character makes decisions that seem kind of crazy or out of the norm, it's more than likely that someone is going to react. I brought up Saphira because Saphira is just like one of the most popular characters in the story, and was literally just the vegetable and fruit stand girl in our first book. But then all of a sudden people are like, that's it, she's the wife, she's the true wife, why isn't she there? And she became more of an important character in the books, I think mostly because people loved her so much. So I'm like, yeah, we can bring her back, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll just second what she said. Side characters are just as important as the main characters. Try not to get too caught up with like main character syndrome, in that, you know, the plot only moves when the main character wants it to. People only react when the main character wants them to. People are going to react to situations if the character says something stupid or witty, or they offend one another. They're just as much people as anybody else. So you need to at least just give them a basic, hey guys, shh. Give them a basic reaction to things, bare minimum.
Another side character that actually became really big for us was Espada. And Espada is just the blacksmith in our world. But we started like coming up with like why she was on the island and why she was hiding away. And just like Chocobo said, the world did hack into Espada and she's kind of coping. So there's a lot to discover and a lot of the world that you can explore. One thing that we did with our story was, from the beginning, we let patrons decide on who were going to be our side quest chapters, which are like interlude chapters. So we would throw these side characters up and say, okay, who do you want to learn more about? So people would vote on them, and like the more voting, obviously the more chapters. So we would kind of delve into them a bit more and be able to explore our world that way, which turned out to be a huge boon for us because we got to learn more about our world and the characters, and readers got to learn more about the side stuff that was happening off screen from Matt too, and get the girls' perspectives.
Yeah, exactly like she said. You might surprise yourself, actually. Some side characters who might be little more than a footnote in one or two of your volumes, or whatever arc of your story you're in, may actually end up becoming a main character or a driving force for some other future endeavor.
Who's the most voted character? It's hard to say because we've split up the girls from the guys. I want to say Saphira and Espada for the girls, but Portia was always up there too. So
yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I feel like Saphira is probably the most popular. Portia's probably a close second. And then, yeah, that's how it's felt to me. I'd have to take a look at the numbers, but that's how it's felt.
A couple of the Espada chapters I know I wrote on my own because I couldn't wait for people to vote anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember there were a few times Espada was on there and she didn't get voted for, and you ended up writing chapters for her anyway, so.
Look, I wanted to see it. It was cool. I needed more.
I don't regret it. She's turned into a great character.
And as we always need to remind you, your story is awesome. All of you. Everyone's story here is freaking awesome. No one who can tell it like you. No one has it like you. And you need to tell it. Like, the whole world needs your story.
If you like it, somebody else does too. There is always an audience. It does not matter what story you're trying to tell. Nobody will ever write your story the way you did. So keep writing.
And we're going to open the floor again to more questions. So any more questions, and I'll give you guys a minute to type. I'm going to grab Ryan and I water, and I will be right back.
Well, Traileon, that's going to happen regardless. Even the best works of art are criticized. There's no getting away from that. Of Armorman and Haremland. I'm going to assume you meant Janusz from our prior panel, like at the beginning. And that's okay, Charma. As usual, we can always answer your questions in the Discord as well. 2/3ish in. Well, if it's Yanu, she's dead, so. Kailu is still in the story. He's walking around. He's doing his thing. Oh, Magni, the Dragon Man, I think you mean. Yeah. I can't say. That would be a spoiler. But as for his threat level, he's a very high threat. He is one of the strongest in the land. I will say that much. What's the best way to have a character notice something? Just plain stating or some other way? That depends on the character. This goes back to what that character values, what they notice. Are they more the type to notice body language? Are they more the type to notice how people say things? Do they notice details most people don't? It really depends on the character and what you are willing to divulge to the reader. I will say try not to get too explanatory. If you're info dumping like how a character looks in the history of the world, you're going to lose a lot of your readers. If you're going to spend like 4, 5, 6 pages explaining the intricacies of the city, you're probably going to lose your reader. They're going to sit there, zone out, and they're not going to remember a lick of what you just said. Okay, let's see. Was there anything surprising or enlightening while preparing or hosting this workshop? There always is. We always end up finding out that there's more that we want to say than we have time for, or we ended up having a lot more to say than we realized. That the same went for this one actually. She put the panel together while I was working on a commission for another client. And then I went over it afterwards with her, and I added a few things of my own. We're always adding. Characters especially are, in our opinion, the most complex part of a story, and they're what drives a story. The world and its elements can be interesting, but if the characters are not interacting with it and posing these questions and posing these possibilities, then all they are is just what-if scenarios.
I feel bad that I totally forgot a side characters panel. Like, I wrote a whole friggin' blog on side characters and how to make compelling side characters, and I forgot them, and I'm sorry, side characters.
You had a whole panel? Where was this?
Oh, I had a giant blog I wrote. When I was trying to make my own blog after I wrote Resonance, one of the blogs I did on my Patreon was like about how to write compelling side. This is like 10 years ago.
Oh, this is way before Catgirls. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just like, why didn't I know about this? That makes sense.
Sure you did. I'm sure I showed you because you loved Hilda. I wrote it because my first book, one of the favorite characters was a barkeep, like a barkeep that I wrote, and she had less than 10 lines. And people were like, she's my favorite. And I'm like, what?
Sitting there like, why? Like, I liked Hilda a lot too. I was just like, oh, cool. I'd love to know more about her. And thank you so much, Creamy. Really appreciate that.
Big ones. Any other questions you guys have for us now? You can always ask later in our Discord.
We will be uploading this to YouTube as well. So if you're coming in late and you're sad you didn't catch the rest of the panel, we will be uploading it. So don't worry about that.
And then as always, if you have questions, we have our Discord. Oh, Inky, what do you do when detailing parts of character design is relevant symbolism, especially when some of the symbolism is immediately obvious? How do you avoid over-explaining? So one example would be the sapphires for Sorsha. We decided the sapphires way late on, but we already had some of the priests and stuff with sapphires in their hair. And we didn't mention like what they did until Cannoli went to preschool and they started talking about what they did. So my recommendation for something like that is you can mention that it's there, but have it come up or have the character ask or something. Just have it an organic explanation instead of just all of a sudden info dumping.
Taking cannoli as an example, let's say somebody who's not familiar with the source of faith comes across her, she's dressed up. They could say, oh, well, she wore long, extravagant robes, ornately detailed, and she wore sapphires in her hair. And that kind of person is probably going to stick out. So they're going to think, oh, you know, maybe they're kind of important for something, but they don't know what.
I went back in volume 5 and we had come up with this idea that for Cannoli, when she advances in her school, they do more embroidery, like gold embroidery in her robe, and then like the sapphires in their hair. So in volume 5, there's the priests that are at the duel. So I went and I added like gold embroidery to their robes to actually like kind of predate that and foreshadow it a bit for when Cannoli does go to the school. So it's okay to like design something and then kind of trickle it in later, even if it's going back in your story and trickling it in and then explaining it later, but just kind of having the build up for that.
Keep in mind, like when you finish your first draft, it's not going to be your first. In fact, if you really want it to be good, there's a great chance that you're going to go through it at least 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 more times before you decide that the story is exactly how you want it to be told. So even if you discover something later on, like 3/4 of the way through the story, you're like, oh, cool, there's this faith or there's this culture or something that comes up later on that I should really make a little bit more evident at the beginning parts of my story, then you can do that. You can go back and just rewrite certain portions of it and retrofit it to your needs.
Does that make sense, Inky? Yeah, Creamy, go read Cat Girl Heresy.
Join us. Okay, good. Yeah, just want to make sure you understand. By all means, ask any questions. Like she said, that we just want to help people out. We just want to try and make the process easier for everybody else. Really just share our knowledge.
And then you can always ask more questions in our Discord. Our books are up everywhere you can find books. Volume 5 is coming when Amazon decides it's okay.
It's on its way.
That's okay, Terma. If you come up with them later, you can throw them in Writer's Workshop and we will answer. But thank you, everyone, for coming to our panel. I know this one was a long one and pretty intensive, so we appreciate you very much.
Yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. We will answer any further questions that come up, whether it be through DMs, Discord, even the YouTube video when we upload it later. Just feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you guys, and we will talk to you soon. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Good night.